Yeah, so we've got Matt here from Swivel Creations, who is working on a very cool. Um, would you say it's a port, or you're bringing this a very old game back for iPhone and Android? And before we jump into the bits and pieces, the nuts and bolts of how you're doing this, I'm really curious to ask why Bounder?
I say Bounder's one of those games that sort of really resonates with people from back in the day.
Yeah,
It's because it was so infuriatingly difficult to play. It was, it had very, very challenging levels. It was also fun as well,
yeah,
but it also had lots and lots of things that kept drawing gamers back. And I think it was the combination of it being having elements of that simplicity and then the completely frustrating parts. And to be honest with you, it's one of those games that sort of stuck with me and certainly stuck with a lot of retro gamers, and this is why, I feel it's a good opportunity to bring it back to mobile because I think it's perfectly suited to that now.
yeah. So Bounder was like I know it as a Commodore 64 game.
Mm.
Um, uh, Coming from New Zealand, the Commodore 64 was probably the first computer a lot of families owned in New Zealand. Um, what was the scene like when Bounder came out, in the 80s in the UK?
Well, I'm a Commodore 64 man myself,
Yeah,
and again, that's another reason why Bounder, sort of really stuck in my mind because obviously the music and the sound effects, of course, on the Commodore 64
yeah,
was excellent,
yeah, it
and it's
was.
still regarded as one of those sort of tunes that everyone really loves and it sort of sticks in their memory a lot.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, back in the day, I remember I had friends who had Amstrad, who also had the Spectrum, and they all had Bounder as well. And you could sort of see the differences. We used to go around each other's houses and play
yeah,
the different versions, as well as numerous other games. But
yeah,
as I say, it always seemed to be that Bounder was the one that sort of stuck with me.
yeah.
And I just thought, with my contacts now, it's a really good opportunity to bring it to mobile.
So we both played the game on Commodore, but the
Yeah,
UK was very different in the sense that you guys had, like I said, the Amstrad and the Sinclair and stuff like that.
we did. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Plus BBC B Micro, we had lots of different computers at the time.
yeah. So
Mm.
you guys have decided to port three versions of Bounder to mobile. Tell us about the three different versions and why you've selected those.
Okay, so I mean, as far as I was concerned, the three biggest computers from the 80s were certainly in the UK with the Commodore 64 being number one, and then the sort of Spectrum, then the Amstrad,
Yeah,
and each version of Bounder of those did offer something slightly different. So what we've done here is, with this game is not to do a direct port or create an emulator. We actually recoded everything. So the reason why we've done that is because obviously mobile works in a very different way
yeah,
to those computers, of course, and obviously we want to add more features to the game and stuff like that. But we started off with a Commodore 64 version first, so we extracted all of the original graphics, all the original sound. So we've got all the original sort of maps and sprites and everything like that, and all those had to then be redrawn in a higher resolution for mobile now. Um, and then, of course, as I say, like the Spectrum version again offers something very slightly different for for the actual users because it was one of those games that on the Spectrum which certainly had fairly decent music as well. It was quite
yeah,
incredible
yeah,
for the
yeah,
Spectrum. But I think the port was really good, and the Amstrad one again is again very different. The maps are very slightly different on the Amstrad,
yeah,
and they are, you don't have like the parallel scrolling like you've got with the Commodore 64, but it does make it a little bit more challenging because obviously the Amstrad one is, it's very very colourful and almost at times it can almost be a little bit confusing.
yeah.
I would say in terms of playability, I would say probably the Spectrum one's probably the easiest one to play. I would
So,
say.
so in
Mm.
the app, have you built one game and just made it look different for each version, or have you
Yes,
completely
yes.
made three different versions in the one app?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So we've got a set of core code, Each of the maps, again, as I say, they're very slightly different in terms of their sort of length and width. But in terms of the actual the differences between the Spectrum and Commodore 64 and Amstrad, we've left the enemy patterns the same, but in terms of the way that the ball reacts and the scrolling speed and stuff like that, they're all very, very slightly different. Okay. And what we've done is we've watched a lot of videos on YouTube of where people do the walkthroughs on the Amstrad and on the Spectrum, and just noted down as much as we could, you know, because obviously, as I say, there's 10 levels. For us to actually play through those levels on the Spectrum or the Amstrad would be almost impossible. As I say, the Bounder was very difficult back in the day.
Yeah,
and the beauty of it now is that we've been able to almost rein in some of the difficulty and not remove some of the features, but we've just made it that little bit more easy. And you know, we're looking to add some more elements, you know, to the game that will make, you know, our version resonate with retro gamers, but at the same time, they won't be swearing at their phone, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you know, so it's really, really important that we sort of have that balance. We also want to try and, if possible, try and bring Bounder to a new market as well. So you know, there may well be, you know, new gamers as well that sort of pick this up and play, and we want it that, you know, that they're not going to get too frustrated from the outset.
Well, I mean, the timing's probably right as well. I mean, we're starting to see, you know, Nintendo are putting out first-party retro machines now. Sega have done the same thing, or at Games have done it on behalf of Sega. We've just had the announcement recently of the Commodore 64 Mini that's coming out.
Yes.
Sony as well, bringing out you know, reboots of old titles and stuff like that. Was it intentional that you sort of looked at what was happening in the scene and gone, screw it, now's the right time, or has it just worked out perfectly for you guys?
Yeah, everything sort of fell into place. I mean, it was really, I mean, I've had the license for about, I don't know, sort of 10, 11 months, something like that. And when I was originally making those inquiries, I mean, the last time I'd done a game, by the way, was back in 2005. So I'd done a lot of titles, mobile games for Disney.
Okay.
And so for me, I wanted to get back into the games industry again, but try and get back with a little bit of a bang.
Yeah.
So instead of just coming in and just creating any game trying to get onto the market, I felt I needed some sort of license of some sort.
Yeah.
So I made inquiries, you know, I was looking at a lot of stuff from Melbourne House. That's what I was looking at first. So I was looking at Way of Exploding Fist. There were some other publishers I was looking at, but a lot of these intellectual properties and a lot of games just get absorbed, and there's problems with the rights and everything, but there wasn't many independent publishers out there.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say about the rights, like especially PC titles that came out during the 80s. I mean, some of those rights were so complicated where they were buying a game that was developed in Europe somewhere and then porting it to PC, and one company in the UK owned the rights and one company in the US owned the rights, and one might have had console or whatever. So it was a complicated scene. And have you found any of those complications with you know, with the rights to Bounder so far, or was it quite a straightforward process?
It was actually quite straightforward. I mean, it was. I didn't think it was going to be this straightforward, but basically, Chris, who actually created the original game on a Commodore 64.
Yeah.
I had friends that knew him, so it was literally. But I wanted to contact him myself instead of doing it through a third party. So I literally just made contact with him over Facebook, and I said, look, this is what I'd like to do. I don't know whether it's possible to actually speak to Ian from Gremlin Graphics and to try and obtain this license, but Chris was more than up for it. You know, because he obviously loves the game. It's his idea, it's his original designs, and he was the one who even put together the music on it as well. You know, which obviously and Chris has been like really influential throughout this whole process, really. So Chris put me in touch with Ian, which is obviously the ex-owner of Gremlin Graphics, and literally from that point, it was a case of just me negotiating with with Ian and just trying to get you know, just try and get the right deal, and that's exactly what we've done. So initially we're looking at a mobile version, so it's going to be iOS and Android. But from there on, we're sort of going to be looking at a new Nintendo Switch version as well, but actually include all of the original C64 Spectrum and Amstrad version as well. So depending on the success of Bound on mobile will depend on what other platforms we can port to. Yeah.
So the original guys that developed it, like Gremlin and was it Chris? Was it?
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, Chris.
So
Quigley,
have they been involved at all in the process of recreating this for mobile, or are you able to go back and forth with them on the way they did things, or?
Yeah, I mean, Chris is a busy guy himself, and you know, in terms of what he does, and you know, his own day-to-day stuff with his own developing that he's still doing, you know, that he still does. But from our perspective, he sort of has given us a little bit of free rein with this, because he knows that there's challenges that we had to overcome because obviously, you know, with it being on mobile. But he's been very, as I say, he's been very supportive. And we have sent him regular demos as well as to Ian, which is obviously the license holder, sort of see the progress, and they're both very happy. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And what sort of challenges have you faced with taking a game that was, you know, played on a keyboard or with a controller in some cases, and then taking that to mobile? I mean, it's a different screen ratio, it's a different way of playing games. Like, what have you faced with? Yeah,
I mean, definitely one of the challenges is obviously on traditional monitors, they were a lot taller than obviously the dimensions on the mobile. So, so we've had to sort of think out the box a little bit and think, you know, if obviously you're turning the phone on its side, you're not seeing so much more of the map like you used to do compared to the Commodore 64 screen. You used to see probably like 25% more, you know. So in landscape mode, if you're holding the phone, you are seeing a lot less of the map, which obviously makes the game a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So we've had to do a portrait mode as well, which is an orientation mode, which is it's not complete yet for all the levels, but we've done it for a vast majority of them now, and it seems to be working well. That the user throughout the game